This is just going to be a really short lecture on connecting your motivation with your photography. One of the promises I made you in the intro was that I was going to train your brain. I was going to teach you how to think differently, how to think like a pro sports photographer. One of the ways to do that is to think in layers. So I write novels and screenplays, and when I am thinking about a storyline and creating my characters, or if I'm watching a movie, I'm reading the Bible, or I am looking at a piece of art, I'm looking at it on a couple different levels. One is what you're seeing. One is what's the storyline, what's right in front of you, and which equates very nicely to the action on the field. But then there's another layer. There's the backstory. And in a sporting event, the backstory could be any number of things. I'm going to show you a few pictures that'll demonstrate what I'm talking about here. They demonstrate this sort of layered approach to photography. Here's a picture I took right after the end of a football game. And while on one layer, the excitement around the team winning the game was very evident, but there was another story, there was another layer to this photograph that tells a different story. Here's another example. Now, I took this photo right at the time this coach was embroiled in a national controversy, and so the picture of him coming across the field was on one layer, but at the same time there is this darkness, there's the rain falling down, a bleak sort of dreary environment that he's in that kind of at the time really reflected on a sort of symbolic level what this person was going through in the moment. So the picture was more than just him walking across the field. It was a metaphorical representation of that particular moment in history for this individual. And in that same light, here's another photo of a beloved coach here in the South that for those of you who are international or maybe from other parts of the country don't know Pat Summitt's story, but I consider this to be one of my best photos that I've ever taken. And if you know the story behind her and her personal battles with Alzheimer's and what unfolded in this program, this picture was taken, it wasn't her last game, but I think it was one of the last 2 or 3 games that she was ever on the floor, that she ever was in a coaching position. She was clearly not coaching at the time. She was just merely present, and this was her assistant coach that was really coaching the game for her team. And this picture, this photo, is very symbolic of this new coach taking on her role while her mentor is literally looking over her shoulder in the very, very final stages of her career. So there's a layer. There's 2 stories being told in these photographs. And even though you might be beginners and just starting down the pathway on your journey, there is something significant to keep in mind here. So just very briefly, your motivation really comes down to 2 broad categories. You're either shooting for yourself or you're shooting for somebody else. And there's no right or wrong way. There's no right or wrong answer. If you're just beginning, your motivations might be simply building a portfolio or trying to take really cool pictures, and there's nothing wrong with that. Farther on down the line, you may be shooting for someone else. So your motivation might be completely different than for somebody who is just trying to build a portfolio. So if you're shooting for yourself, it's very easy to examine what your motivations are and how to respond to those. You're just looking for the best pictures that you could possibly take to put into your portfolio. When you're shooting for the benefit of someone else, you really do approach the game or the event quite differently. And honestly, for me, as an example, if you go to my website, you look at some of the games that I've covered for high schools, I have photos in there that I would probably not normally put out for public display. But they are there because I am taking those pictures for some of the players who don't get to play much, and some of those photos were the only photos that I had available of that particular player, and those are there for someone else's benefit. So you have to kind of weigh these things sometimes when you're making decisions about not only what to shoot, but what you're going to display for public scrutiny. And sometimes you have to post things for other people's benefit, for their enjoyment, that do not necessarily support your own desires to have your best work out there for the public to see. So this is just a really brief discussion about not only what your motivations are, but also trying to identify and understand what those different layers are to the event that you're shooting, and how you might incorporate your purpose there with those different layers that present themselves at the event. So I hope that helps. And the next lecture will be starting down the pathway to how we're going to shoot these pictures. See you in the next lecture.